know what I mean? It's like, what is wrong with you? And so this kind of brings us to our first topic that I want to
Hmm.
kind of talk about, and that's the whole, uh, you know, Teyana Taylor winning her first Golden Globe award for One Battle After Another. People were upset, and I'm trying to figure out why, because that film. So let me jump into the criticism of that particular thing first. They were like, her character is over sexualized in the film, and they were like, they didn't like how she was being portrayed, like a black woman being portrayed, which brings us to the overall topic of how should black people act in films. And we kind of spoke about this a little bit eons ago when we talked about black exploitation and how things evolved from there, where you have a subset of people who are like, back in the day, who are like, black exploitation films are great because at least we are on television, we're in theaters, and we get to control the narrative, even though we have to go to the extremes to actually be put on the screen. It's not blackface. And then you had another group of people who are like, yeah, but it's harmful. It's all stereotypes all the time. And these things kind of had to like balance out in some sort of fashion. It wasn't Amos and Andy, but it was still kind of harmful in certain ways. And I get
Mm,
those two arguments, and they're actually both very valid. And
mm,
then you fast forward to, years from then, and you get the concept of, well, the movies that are greenlit are, slave films, or, you know, if you get typecast, you're playing a drug dealer, and that's all black people can be, is drug dealers, and et cetera, et cetera. And so we had to push against that. You had, like, the Cosby Show, we had the Rock Show, we had the Fresh Prince, where you can see positive, black people on TV, and to counterbalance these are the only roles you guys are going to get,
mm,
type stuff, right? And this, I know I'm kind of, simplifying it a bit, but I'm trying to get you guys up to, caught up to speed, so to speak. And so we come to this one, and, in the film, I'm not going to spoil it, but she is very hypersexualized, and she's using it as a weapon. It's partially part of her character. Because people were saying, like, in defense, was like, she was using it because the person that she had, that was trying to control her, she was using it to control them. And I would argue that even before then, she was over sexualized because of how she was with her partner at the time, right? None of that actually mattered to me when I was watching the film, because I thought the film was mid anyways. I thought that the script was bad, very bad. It got to the point where I was texting, not texting, I was tweeting while watching. I paused it. I didn't watch it in theater. I paused it, and I was like, "This is a joke, right?" Because I say that because it was acclaimed, like, all this, like, oh, it's the best movie of the year or whatever. And I was like, no, sinners exist. So what?
right.
But yeah, so I was like, this is interesting. Like, people like this. Like, this is. I was like, please tell me this gets better. And it does, to a degree, and I think that's partially because you have some amazing actors in this film. You have a really, really good director. There's going to be magic that happens. So there's actually a large portion of the film that's just amazing before it gets back to Midtown. And
Mm,
so, I do understand that people will like it in parts, but the beginning parts, and this is the part that we're talking about mostly, was just bad. But it wasn't because of that. I think that Tiana Taylor did a great job for what she was given, and I think that we are allowed to portray it. That the whole problem with the roles that we were given is that we couldn't choose. It was kind of like, this was hot in Hollywood. You gotta be a drug dealer. This was hot
mm,
in Hollywood. If you weren't Denzel, or if it wasn't a Spike Lee flick where we could actually kind of determine how we want to look,
right.
it's kind of like you had to be a certain way. There was a couple people, and there's that whole myth of there's going to be one successful black person at a time. So you had the Wesley Snipes era, you had the Will Smith era, and stuff like that. But in terms of just our how we want to look, it kind of came down to black directors, um, to where we would kind of get that wiggle room, right? So now we get to the point where we can kind of do anything, and people are upset. A lot of it's coming from people who are younger, who might not know any of that history,
Hmm.
and some of it might be coming from, just the idea of how it looked, because it doesn't look good, but that's kind of the point. Like, it's not supposed to be a positive thing, and
Hmm.
I think people are missing that. Like, showing a negative thing in a film doesn't mean you are championing that negative thing. Um, and I think people are kind of like misconstruing that, whatever. But regardless of how you feel about it, the conversation online is toxic. it is like I was like I was gonna like dip my toe in. I was like, nah, you know what? I might get my leg ripped off. So let me not do that. And let me go do a safe space, this podcast, where I could
Right.
kind of express myself in a manner that is a little bit more healthy. Um, so I wanted to, ask you, Tess, being a black woman, and then
Mhm.
also just the idea of this notion of like what is or isn't acceptable, because I do think there is a line in terms of how we are portrayed. Like for instance, this will help everyone. If you've seen the Wayans show, right? The Wayans brothers show, there's a part of the show where, or an episode where Marlon's character is going to do advertisement. Like he's someone found him and was like, "Oh, you look handsome or whatever, and you're funny. We're gonna put you in commercials." And the first commercials he was in were fine. They were stereotypical, but they were fine. And then
Mhm.
there was another commercial that he did towards the end where like his grandpa and everything were saying like, or pops was saying like, "Hey man, I think they're like using you. Like this is on some Sambo blackface, like just really coonery type stuff." And he's like, "Nah,
Mhm.
we're good. We're getting paid well and everything's cool." And it was like a malt liquor commercial, and they were doing the most, the absolute most, and it was obviously it was over the top to be funny too, but it was disgusting to the point where they removed the laugh tracks. There's no laugh tracks when it's happening because they don't want you to think
Wow.
it's funny. They
Yeah.
want you to be like, this is bad. And so I do think there is an area where we should not go to. Outside of that, I think you should be able to be, if you want to be portray a doctor, a scientist, a drug dealer, a vampire, like whatever you want to be. I think you
Mhm.
can. That's the whole idea of acting. I don't think it has to
Right.
necessarily always be a racial thing, even when it is a racial thing, if that makes sense.
I hear you. I agree to that. I don't know. I mean, I don't wanna say I have to have seen it to chime in, because I didn't. I haven't watched it yet because I haven't watched
Right.
anything, because
Right.
I don't do anything but go to work and take care of my dog. And and I don't even know
for
if I'm
for
doing that
valid
great.
reasons. For valid
Valid,
reasons.
valid, valid, valid
Right.
reasons. I mean, am I taking care of her? She's constantly licking a pillow as if that is the only activity she's ever learned to do. Poor child. And but I guess when it comes to people's opinions of the over sexualization of black females, I mean, I understand that. I understand everything that it means. And and I think that kind of goes back to Halle Berry winning a Oscar for her role in Monsters Ball,
Right. Right.
And I mean, if we go back to that, of course, I'm happy Halle won an Oscar. Um, I never thought that that was her best work, and I just thought it was so interesting that that got her that role, which was just so traumatic on it. I just think everything in that movie was just traumatic, but I don't think that trauma is what drives your acting ability. I'm just saying everybody
Right.
has
Right.
their what is it called? Like what they're really good at.
Right.
And and that wasn't the best.
Right.
That wasn't the best one. But again, we also have to remember the Oscars are not about somebody doing their best work. They're about, was it greater than the other people in the category that people voted for because
Exactly.
they actually watched the films. I mean, we found out that the Academy doesn't have the voting body, majority of the voting body doesn't even watch the films.
Yeah, they don't
It's
have to watch all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a popularity contest at that point, or they just ask somebody else. So by the way, I haven't been able to watch 27 movies, so you tell me what you think, and then I will be like, "Oh my god, those are great points, and I'm just gonna vote the way you vote," type thing, or whatever. I don't know, I could be wrong, but um,
It's telling. It's telling,
yeah,
and I also agree with what you were saying in terms of the competition at that year. Like maybe
yeah,
you had a better year, but the competition was extremely stiff
yeah,
versus this year, not as much, but you still did solid. So we put,
yeah,
you got in there.
yeah,
Um, and then also the age of the people who were voting, because
right.
we've seen that with the Grammys. Like when the younger people got in, things were righted a little bit, if you will. Um,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So I could definitely see that.
yeah,
But yeah, it was at the same time though, I don't necessarily think that it was the sexual part that kind of put her
Mhm.
over the top, maybe. I can't remember who was in the running that year, but I thought even though the movie, I don't think the movie's great. I was like, I think
Yeah.
she was the best part of it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's a great idea as for us at this point in time in 2026 to really put either limitations or whatnot on, how we as especially Black women should act. I wish that the world was equitous. Is that the word? Equitable enough where we didn't
Mm,
have to feel like we can't portray X role or we have to portray X role. Um, and then it seemingly only to be recognized by these massive institutions when we do the same thing.
right.
And that bothers that's annoying because why is it like that? Why why is that the thing?
Facts. Yeah. And it's because I'm very much aware of, or with the have the understanding of how things manifest, Hollywood side, like, this doesn't work until this works. This doesn't work until this work, or we're not allowed to do these things. Even just the categories, the fact that, and we're going to talk about Sinners in a little bit, but the fact
Mhm.
that when Sinners got nominated for their Oscars, how they tried to change the genre from horror to like
Mm.
supernatural thriller or something to that effect, because uh, they don't respect horror, and which is
Mhm.
silly. It's an art form. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? But and so like I can understand in that sense of like, oh, we don't win unless we're et cetera, et cetera. And while there might be some true to that, I also feel like, for instance, they were talking about Denzel Washington in Training Day, and I was like, he did win an award before that.
Yeah.
And not only that, but if you look at Training Day versus a few of the other roles that he had been in up until that point, it was a nice departure from what he usually plays, and I think
Mhm.
that's why it put him over the top because
Mhm.
he's usually the hero. Even
Yeah.
in Mo Better Blues, he's not a good guy at all,
Yeah.
but he's still very much him, like a version of himself.
Mhm.
Whereas in Training Day, I felt like he this is not the Denzel I grew up with. This was,
Mhm.
this was a different, seemingly different person on
Mhm.
screen. And I think that's what kind of, plus it was a good movie. Like, I think that would kind of put him
Yes.
over, So it's not just because like, oh, he had to be a crooked person before they gave him an award. I don't think we've been crooked before. We have plenty of
Yeah.
films of us doing unsavory things and not winning awards for them, for
Yeah.
that not to be some type of conspiracy. So
Yeah.
no, but I do get it where the idea comes from. This also reminds me real quick of, there was talks about, and I'm not going to talk about the singer who brought this up because she's been getting enough flack as is, but she talked about how Pam on the Martin show, how some of the jokes weren't, they were more colorist, if
Yeah.
anything.
Mhm.
And well, I don't think that's necessarily the case. uh I also don't think that the defense that we give for it is good enough.
Mm.
For instance, people will say like, well, Martin joked with everybody and everybody got
Mhm.
joked on. That's never flew with me, because just because you're offensive to everybody, like if you're
Mhm.
if
Equal
you think
opportunity
about it,
offender.
right, think about it. If someone is dissing everyone's mother and no one else does something, but then they diss yo mama, that's a problem. Like, you're not going to
Mhm.
be like, oh, he also said something about his mom. Like, no, you're going to swing on him. At least from where I'm from,
Right.
that's a no. That's a no. You know what I'm saying? So like, I don't understand that idea, and I think that the jokes that pertain to her being an animal with
Mhm.
being a dark skinned woman was not in good taste. It just
Yeah.
wasn't, and that uh, gives some credence to the criticism that there was some coloristic stuff in play, especially with her counterpart being Gina, a light skinned woman.
Right.
That being said, I can also still be like, I don't think that was the case, considering Pam was initially supposed to be an overweight woman, and they had all these different jokes written, and a lot of the jokes that they came up with was done. Um, it wasn't necessarily written. Like, they would joke with each other back and forth and be like, okay, we're gonna keep these particular jokes or
Mhm.
whatever. That's a lot of the reasons why you see Martin breaking character, is because there's a joke that'll happen that wasn't scripted. And so, um, I think two things can be true at the same time, and I think
Mhm.
that we are allowed to criticize the things that we love. I do think you
Yeah.
can criticize one after another and still recognize that Tiana Taylor did a great job and she's deserving of the Golden Globe. And that is the problem that I see on Twitter is that we can't do that. We can't have two thoughts at the same time.
Yeah.
Everything has to be extremes. And even when we start to ask questions or to investigate why we feel the way we feel, all we get is toxicity. We get name calling and fights and all this other stuff, which is sad because I think there's some good conversation to be had about this stuff amongst us.